I'm going to turn this on so everybody can hear me. I gave a talk last month at the National Arts Club, and people started walking out because they couldn't hear me, so I don't want anyone to feel like they can't hear me, so they're not going to stick around for the talk. It's great to be back in Long Branch. I think this is my 4th time speaking here to you guys, although tonight I'm not following the dog catcher. Wonderful guy. He's a natural. I miss him, so please give my regards next time you see him with your strays. Before I talk about the book, I wanted to catch you up. It's been a little while since I was here last on what's been happening with the Dorothy Parker Society in New York, and because this is ground zero for Dorothy Parker fans, what we've been up to. 3 initiatives. 2 we've been unsuccessful, and 1 we have been successful. The successful one was getting Dorothy Parker into the New York State Writers Hall of Fame. She went in with Willa Cather and Herman Melville, so that was very nice. And because of that, I'm now invited to all their events and being hit up for money annually. But at the last one that they have at the Princeton Club in Midtown. I was there, and one of the initiatives we've been trying for Mrs. Parker is to get into the New Jersey Hall of Fame. We thought it'd be great to, put her in with the E Street Band and Sinatra and the Sopranos cast. No luck. And what happened is at the last meeting of the New York State Writers Hall of Fame, Joyce Carol Oates was there. And she was elected not only to the New York State Writers Hall of Fame, but to the New Jersey Hall of Fame the previous week. So I was in the room at the Princeton Club, and there's Toni Morrison and E.L. Doctorow and Joyce Carol Oates, and my wife is standing next to me, and she said, "You are not going to talk to her." I said, "Yes, I am." So the little writer from Princeton is standing there with her husband. She seemed very nice, and I went up to her and I said, "Joyce Carol Oates, it's really nice to meet you. I want to congratulate you. I'm the president of the Dorothy Parker Society." She's looking at me like I have 2 heads. I said, "Congratulations on being the first person to get into the New Jersey Hall of Fame and the New York State Writers Hall of Fame. However, you took Dorothy Parker's spot." And she didn't know what to say, so she said, "Well, maybe she'll get in next year." So we're still working on that one. And the other one we're working on is about 2 years ago, the MTA restarted its Poetry in Motion program, where they put poems in the subway stations, and now they have Metro cards, so they put them on the back of about 7 million Metro cards. So we've been trying for about 1.5 years to get Dorothy Parker included in this program. And we submitted the poems we think would be, eligible and, good to have, while you're holding onto your strap to be looking at. No luck so far, and I met the woman who runs the Poetry Society of America, who's in charge of this program, and she said to me, "It's not a matter of if, but when." So I said, "When?" And so we're still waiting, and in the meantime, if you want my opinion, all the poems they've been picking are terrible. And for the last year, because it's the 100th anniversary of Grand Central Station, they've had a whole year of poems about Grand Central Station. So it's kind of self-referential that you're on a subway late trying to get to Grand Central Station. You have to look at a poem on the wall about the station. So hopefully in 2014 we will get Mrs. Parker on the side of a subway car and on the back of all these Metro cards. When I got approached to do the cocktail book last year, you should know that because I run DorothyParker.com, all email to Dorothy Parker comes to me, and I get a lot of crazy messages, people that want to, produce her shows, or write music to her words. There's a ballet company that's going to do a dance interpretation. So everything in the world comes to me. So last fall, I got an email from a total stranger, an editor, and he said, please call me. I want to talk to you about something. So I call him, and it turns out he's been stalking me for 3 or 4 years, and he wants to see if I'm interested in working on a cocktail book. Now, I'm a huge Dorothy Parker fan, but I'm not 100% behind promoting her as a drinker, since she was a functional alcoholic, and she had a lot of problems over the years because of booze. putting her name on a book about cocktails, wasn't, something that I was already thinking about doing. But he approached me about this project, and I knew that if I didn't do it, someone else was going to do it anyway and just rip off my work. So why not do it myself and put my own spin on it and really have fun with it? So the genesis of the project was this. There are a lot of cocktail recipes out in the world. Some guides have 1,000 to 5,000 recipes. But what I wanted to focus on was not the Harvey Wallbanger and the Long Island iced tea and all those kind of common drinks that are, really silly, but drinks tied into Prohibition in the speakeasy era. Because a lot of cocktails that were coming out of the teens and 20s were to hide how bad the booze was, the bootleg gin and the homemade things. So all these cocktails were being created for this. Now, because the Algonquin Round Table started in 1919, it was right when Prohibition was kicking in. There's a lot of references to alcohol in not just Dorothy Parker's writing, but in all of the Algonquin Round Table work. George S. Kaufman, Mark Connolly, certainly the Marx Brothers. So with this whole world of material about the Round Tablers and the 20s, it wasn't actually a huge stretch to do a book just about these recipes from that era. And the editor, when I decided to do the deal, he said, "Oh, and I have a list of the drinks." I said, "I actually don't need your list of the drinks because, as you know, the Dorothy Parker Society, we don't have meetings, we have parties. And we've been having a monthly vintage party at a former speakeasy in Midtown for 10 years. So we've already been trying out all these recipes. So for him to have to tell me, well, think about this or think about that, it was pretty easy that we already, knew what we were going to be writing about. So the book has 75 recipes. 65 of them will be familiar to you if you've heard of the Sidecar and the Rob Roy Martini, the Tom Collins Gin Fizz, the very famous, most famous drinks from not just the Prohibition era, but going back to the 18th and 19th century in some cases, like the Stone Fence and Old Fashioned and things like that. But these are all the recipes that came out of bartender guides from the teens and the Prohibition era. So what it became fun to do was to narrow down the list to some unusual drinks that you might not have heard of, named after some of the celebrities of the era. Like there's a Ziegfeld drink, Jack Dempsey, Gene Tunney, there's a Helen Hayes drink. All these ties into people from that era. So that became a lot of fun. Then it's the testing part, right? So we have these monthly get-togethers at a former speakeasy, and so we have this list of recipes to try them out. And this is where the research kicks in. So some of my favorites that we've put in here are the ones that went over very well because we would have a party with about 100 people. You could see what people really liked to try. One of my favorites is the French 75. Now the French 75, if you haven't had it, it's gin, it's based with gin, and it's topped with champagne. It gets its name from World War I. The Doughboys brought it back over. It's named after a 75mm French field gun that protected Paris and was shooting shells at the Germans. So that's where this drink was, beloved by the Doughboys over there. They brought it back. Irvin S. Cobb said that he was handed one in the Argonne. He didn't know if it was a shell or the drink that hit him. But it's a fantastic drink, and everybody thinks of champagne as just a drink to have at a celebration or a wedding or something like that. But when you mix it with the gin, something just kicks in. It's very, very tasty. Another one is the Aviation, and the Aviation, of course, came around after 1909, 1910, and that's a gin drink. But the key to that one is putting creme de violet in it that turns the drink blue for the sky. And that was a super popular drink in the Prohibition era that kind of fell out of favor, and now it's coming back, and we've been seeing it for about 10 years. Another thing that was really fun to do in the book was to find out the history of a lot of these drinks, like the Rob Roy. I always thought the Rob Roy was named after, Rob Roy McGregor, the Scottish folk hero, but it's actually named after a Broadway show about him from the 1890s that was super popular in New York, and the old Waldorf Astoria name the drink after the show. And so that would allow me to talk about the old Waldorf, which was demolished, and that's where the Empire State Building is today. And one of the interesting things I found is the hotel was a whole city block, because that's where the Empire State Building is. It was demolished in 8 weeks, and all of the remains were dumped off of Sandy Hook. So if you ever went scuba diving off Sandy Hook, all that fill out there was the old fantastic terracotta and marble and brickwork from the late lamented Waldorf Astoria. So that's your Jersey Shore connection to that drink. A few of the others that were really fun to do, we have 2 boxers in the book, Gene Tunney and Jack Dempsey. Their drinks, of course, are very strong. As we say, one more and you're going to be knocked out, but just one is probably enough. A lot of the drinks are extremely potent, and you don't want to have a whole lot of them. A good one that we added was there's 10 recipes from 10 different places around the country that are new to the book. New meaning there aren't any other guidebooks before, because when I was putting together the outline of the cocktail guide, I knew that just recycling 75 recipes that have probably appeared in other books probably wouldn't be super appealing. So what I did is I looked at I looked for 10 places around the country that had outstanding cocktail recipes that could be added to the book and kind of give another dimension to just not making it so New York focused. So there's a Las Vegas place, they give a seersucker punch. There's a place in Los Angeles called the Edison, which is in an old 1930s power station. It has a drink called the Happy Herbie, and it's named after Herb Ryerson, who was he worked for Walt Disney, and they say the drink puts you in the happiest place on earth. So they gave me the recipe. There's a recipe from San Francisco for the Emperor Norton. He was a local character that proclaimed himself the Emperor of the United States. They named a drink after him. Really well-known figure out there. Boston is in the book, Chicago's in the book, New Orleans is in the book. And what was fun about all the drinks that those bartenders sent me, these recipes, is they're very tasty and really good, but they also have an underlying speakeasy era to them. The one from the French Quarter is called the Bywater Cocktail, which is a take on the Brooklyn cocktail, because people say that Bywater is a neighborhood of New Orleans, is very similar to Brooklyn. So that was really fun to put in the book too. And these 10 haven't been collected anywhere else. Another fun thing in the book, and it's new since I was here last time, is Alan Katz wrote the foreword to the book. And Alan is a renowned cocktail expert. He's on Martha Stewart's Sirius XM radio show talking about cocktails. But what his partners did 2.5 years ago is they started a distillery in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. It's called the New York Distilling Company, and they are distilling gin and whiskey in an old warehouse. And it's doing gangbuster business. And the first gin they brought out was called Dorothy Parker American Gin. And it has taken off like gangbusters. It's now sold coast to coast. It's being distributed in Europe as well. It's been written up in Esquire and Playboy as a fantastic gin. And I went out there to the distillery where they're making it and observed them. They do the bottling there, they do the labeling there, and it's really taken off. And what I like is it's spreading Dorothy Parker's name across the country, but also ties into the fun side of her career, which is writing about drinking and putting drinking references into some of her books and things. And what happens at the distillery is people come into they have a bar attached to the distillery called the Shanty, where you can actually sample the drinks, just as they come out of the distillery. People come in and they don't have any idea who Dorothy Parker is, but they find out about her through the drink. And so there's like this now cyclic thing of people that know about Parker from the books are buying the gin, but people that are just gin drinkers like, well, why do you name a gin after Dorothy Parker? It's because Alan, who is the co-founder of the company, he was a Parker fan in college, and he read The Portable Dorothy Parker. When he was married several years ago, he and his wife read Here We Are to each other at their wedding. So he was a big Parker fan, so I just knew that I had a kindred spirit. And when the editor said, who do you want to do the foreword, I said, Alan would be a fantastic choice. And so that's added a really good dimension to actually talk about gin recipes and using Dorothy Parker gin in it. It's kind of like using holy water for lords, in some of these drinks. And it makes for really good cocktails too. I'm not even paid by the company to say this, but fantastic stuff. one of the things that's been fun about talking about this book for the last month in different, libraries and salons and bookstores that I've been to, is everyone seems to have a favorite cocktail that they either got from their parents or their grandfather or a college friend that they've carried with them through their life. And that is their go-to drink. And so it's been really fun to hear people tell a story about their drink. And one of those is my mother. Now, if you look in the book, there's two sterling silver shot glasses in the back, and those were my parents. My grandfather gave them to my parents almost 50 years ago after one of their wedding anniversaries, and they actually have a martini every day at 6 o'clock. Maybe that's why they've been married for 52 years. And I was at a wedding several years ago with my mother when it was in the fall, and we went to the bar, and I ordered a gin and tonic, and she sniffed, "That's a summer drink." So then I kind of was putting two and two, like, wow, she really knows what she's talking about. So I switched to a highball, whiskey highball, and that's been my winter drink ever since. But it's been really fun hearing people talk about the stone fence or the old-fashioned, that the way their dad made them or their grandfather made them. One of the most popular, probably after the martini, the Bloody Mary is certainly beloved. And, what Saturday or Sunday morning brunch is not complete without Bloody Mary? So the Bloody Mary actually started in Paris, and after Prohibition ended, Astor brought the guy that created it over to New York, and so that's how the Bloody Mary took off in New York. But I didn't want the Bloody Mary recipe, so that's one of the 10 new drinks in the book that was created at a dive bar on Avenue A in East Village. And the way this bartender, Joanna, makes them, it's extremely spicy. It's with a tequila that's infused with jalapeno. So, and you put the beans in there too, and the spicy stuff. It's like rocket fuel. And we had a little book launch party there 2 weekends ago, and we went through 3 gallons of the mix. It's very good stuff. But it's a great Saturday or Sunday afternoon recipe, and with the holidays coming up, it's perfect. That recipe got me in trouble with the editor because he was very, very formulaic about how the book was put together and the measurements, and I couldn't mix up ounces and whatnot. But for the Bloody Mary recipe, I did a serving of 6. And he said, well, every other recipe, all 74 of them, are to make a single drink. Why would you want to make 6 Bloody Marys? And I said, think about it. That's a lot of work to make a Bloody Mary. You're not going to just make 1. You're probably going to at least make 2. So the bartender makes 6 at a time, so we're going to make it in quantities of 6. And you can just cut it in half, and then you're down to 3. He's like, okay, I can see where you're thinking. So that's what there. The other thing is punches are very big now, which is a new thing in the last few years. So the seersucker punch that we have in the book, which is a bourbon-based drink, you can serve it hot or cold. It's gone over very well. And the great thing about a punch is it keeps. Unlike other cocktails, which you need to serve it and drink it right away, a punch you can kind of keep around for a couple of days in the refrigerator and it won't go bad. But those are the key ones. I'd love to ask any questions if anybody had any questions about Mrs. Parker or her work or the drinks in the book.
As the quintessential New Yorker, Dorothy Parker, of course, belongs in the New York Hall of Fame, but do you think her candidacy for New Jersey is impaired by the realization that she disdained her having been born here?
She actually, is this still on? Is this still on?
No.
All right, I'll speak up. Dorothy Parker never slammed New Jersey. This is something that I had out with the mayor a couple of years ago when we had the plaque dedication in 2005. I had to follow him, and the first thing he did is he slammed Dorothy Parker for not being a good New Jersey resident. She actually slammed Hollywood and living in California, but in all of her work, I couldn't find any reference where she denigrated the state of New Jersey. The only thing you could hold against her is New Jersey is where she went to buy her sleeping powders. So she took the ferry over from New York to Jersey City and Hoboken and started going to pharmacies buying up sleeping powders. She got enough together and drank it all, but it didn't kill her.
How did she get that reputation then?
As
a resenter of her New Jersey nativity.
It's kind of hard to imagine. I mean, Dorothy Parker lived in New York, but she was a summer resident of Long Branch for at least 5 or 6 years. Until her mother died in 1899, the family was coming down to the cottage every summer and spending all their summers here. So she had a lot of very good memories about coming to New Jersey. However, after her mother died in Long Branch, you couldn't really expect the family to keep going back to that same house that the mother died in, so that's when they started going to Long Island and other resorts and stuff. So I don't think she ever slammed New Jersey or was ashamed of New Jersey. One of the things she did in the 20s is she would go around with Nisa McMain, who was a very famous magazine illustrator, and McMain would do the illustrations for magazine pieces, and Parker would do the interviews of the subjects. And so they would go to Atlantic City to meet fighters and Broadway stars and people like that. So if she had anything against New Jersey, she was still going back to it.
Maybe she got it from Edmund Wilson.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Are her personal effects on display anywhere?
No. What happened, Dorothy Parker's frenemy was Lillian Hellman. And after Mrs. Parker died in June 1967, Hellman went to her apartment and threw everything out on the street. So all of her papers, books, clothing, mementos, everything except her dog, which went to Beatrice Ames, everything went out the door. Columbia University has a lot of her letters and things that Marion Mead, her biographer has donated, and I've donated some things that I found to there. So there's kind of like a little bit of a collection, but as far as any kind of, you could not put together 2 display cases of her material. It just doesn't exist. Although a man did approach me a few years ago who, Dorothy Parker lived in Bucks County, Pennsylvania for about 10 years. And after she and her husband split up, the house went on the market and they did an estate sale. So a man did approach me with Dorothy Parker's clothes. But my wife said that'd be a little bit too weird to start buying up her dresses, so I never even responded to that. So.
That might have been me. By one at least.
No, that's a little bit too beyond
That's what
the
a war.
craziness. Anybody else?
I can't recall the name of the documentary that PBS had, like the 10-year lunch.
The 10-year lunch,
Yeah.
the Beavis Lessons film.
But it's not available for sale?
It's on YouTube.
It is?
Yeah, you can watch it online for free.
The
Yes.
10-year lunch.
The 10-year lunch. It won an Academy Award for Best Documentary in 1987.
It's on YouTube, but you can't buy it.
Right.
That's interesting.
Yes.
Thank you.
What is the level of interest in Dorothy Parker nationally and internationally? How is she?
Good question.
The membership in the society and.
The question was about the popularity of Dorothy Parker today. Dorothy Parker, we're coming up on the 50th anniversary of her death in 2017. She is more popular now than when she died, and there's more of her work in print today than when she died. Her poetry has all been collected, her short fiction has all been collected. There are not just the Dorothy Parker Society, but there are teachers teaching her in classes. There is a very big interest in her. Getting into a Hall of Fame doesn't really mean anything, but it is kind of a nice pat on the back for someone like her to go in with Herman Melville and Will Cather and Walt Whitman. I mean, that's some pretty good company to be in. And when you consider that what she was writing was not really exactly ephemeral poetry and short fiction, it's all still in print. The Portable Dorothy Parker came out in 1944 and it's never gone out of print. She's the only roundtabler to never have a book go out of print. Her and Edna Ferber are the only ones to keep a book in print, and that's because Ferber, of course, won the Pulitzer Prize for So Big, and you're not going to let a Pulitzer Prize winner go out of print. So I hope that answers your question.
A question about booze at the early turn of the century. Have you ever heard the term dancing with the Green Fairy?
The question is about Dancing with the Green Fairy.
Yeah.
Yes, I have a whole section in the book of, let me read a couple of little things in here. Speakeasy slang. I think that might come from creme de menthe.
I thought it was that one where it's a sugar and you put it, and it's very dangerous.
Absinthe.
Yes.
Absinthe?
Yes.
I'm not I've heard it.
Notice who spoke up.
Let me get this out for you. So here are a few from the book. Anything that was very good was the cat's pajamas, the cat's whiskers, or the bee's knees. An oil burner was a gum-chewing girl. If you were from the country, you were a young Otis. Traveling salesmen and out-of-towners were the butter and egg man. A young woman carried mad money. The cat found her purse in case she got in a row with her sweetheart. Ritzy also came into vogue courtesy of playwright George S. Kaufman in 1921. In the New York Tribune, he wrote, "The crock of gold. She's got a Hickson model walk and a line of ritzy talk. Simple little Katie from old Ireland." A flapper who couldn't keep in the swim was a dud, a dumb Dora, or a dumb bunny. A wallflower was a sinker, and a flapper over 30 was called a flat tire. Has anyone heard of a cakey or a cake eater? They were really self-indulgent kind of people. A cakey was a guy that took out a girl every night. Could be a snake. Drinkers carried hip flasks. You can be jammed, loaded. You get ossified to the gills. And this is also the first time that hair of the dog was invented, and giggle water was also popular. Bootleggers also used fantastic jargon. On the slow was what happened when the law found a speakeasy, and the proprietors had to lie low for a few days. Motherships were vessels used to transport illegal booze from port to port. Smaller tugs and watercraft then ferried the cases from the motherships to dry land. Crooks had nicknames for the law. A harness bull for uniformed policemen. Plainclothes cops were sleeves, and detectives were dicks, possibly derived from the London slang. Richard. And cops were elbows, as the Times had in 1924, possibly because the elbow is prominent in the process of collaring. And Donald Ogden Stewart, who was one of Parker's very good friends, he had dreamed of one of the best phrases about a big night out, to drink you under the table. So that's where that one came from, too. It was really fun to put not just the recipes in the book, but a lot about the history of Prohibition and the machinations that went into getting that passed into law and into an amendment to the Constitution, as well as the Roundtablers, the history of the hotel, and the speakeasy culture that all wrapped up around them. That's a lot of fun. So it's not just a straight, here's 75 recipes, but it's also the stories about them and how they got into the vernacular, and we're still drinking them 90 years later. Any other questions?
With Parker so closely identified to the martini, and you're waxing eloquent over the product of this Brooklyn distillery, have you ever been tempted to become a martini drinker?
I love a dry martini. One of the things that I found out is there's whole books just about martinis, and there's this whole culture and cult of personality around the martini, and people fight about the perfect martini, and I would absolutely never have one with vodka or chocolate or any other nonsense they put into the glasses. But the old martinis were pretty much half and half vermouth and half gin. And then this whole dry kick came in after World War II, and all the stories about like people like Winston Churchill who would say you're going to put the glass of vermouth in the room to get it close to the glass, but you're not going to put any in there to have a super, super dry martini. So we have all the variations here: dry, wet, dirty. Has a little bit of juice, onions in there. Gibson is in here, of course. But what's really catching on right now really is Manhattans, which is way more, to me, tolerable than drinking, lining up 8 martinis. And the funny thing about the poem that we talked about, I love a martini, but to at the most 3 I'm under the table, 4 I'm under the host. That's not in any of Parker's books. There's actually no concrete proof that she actually even said it. It's very hard to pin down, and it's not under any copyright either, so you can make as many T-shirts and tchotchkes as you want with that, and the estate can't really go after you. So when the editor said, I want to call the book Under the Table, and then of course my friend said, so the sequel will be Under the Host. I said, okay, but I have to say in the book that Parker, it's kind of an urban legend that she even said that. And she never wrote about martinis. There's no martini reference in any of her poems or stories. She mentions highballs, she mentions scotch, she mentions gin, but there's no mention of her loving martinis. What she did like was a whiskey sour. She was at breakfast once, and She came down and the host said, "What would you like for breakfast?" And she said, "I'd like a dear little whiskey sour."
Have you done a date search for the earliest use of under the host or under the table?
Yes.
And
Silver Steins, two Silver Stein, who did the Not Much Fun, a book of rare Parker poems. He's a contributor to the Oxford English Dictionary, and even he couldn't find anything. The earliest reference is Bennett Cerf made a kind of half reference to half of the net. It only goes back to like the 1950s, so it doesn't go back very far. So, question?
I was wondering if you had a favorite Dorothy Parker piece or poem or short story.
Sure. My favorite short fiction is Arrangement in Black and White. It was in the New Yorker in 1927. It's about racial intolerance at a party. A lot of people, it goes over their head, that they just think it's a funny story. Like Harold Ross, the editor of the magazine, just thought it was hilarious. But when you read between the lines, it's really about two women at a party. It's based on Paul Robeson, fantastic singer, actor, and racial injustice at the time. Parker was really ahead of her time in civil rights and social justice. She left her estate to Dr. King, a man she never met, and to this day the NAACP controls her royalties because she was a really big believer in civil rights. One of the things I've been working on, and hopefully it'll come out in 2014, is a whole collection of Parker's Broadway reviews. She was a drama critic. She was Broadway's only female drama critic from 1918 to 1923. So this is 150,000 words of Dorothy Parker's Broadway reviews that have never been collected before, and that's something I've been working on with a couple of editors. But one of the things that she was doing at that time is she was seeing Al Jolson, Eddie Cantor in blackface. There was still black actors in whiteface. Having Jews on stage was still a novelty and wasn't very popular at the time. And so you had the Jewish Rialto down on 2nd Avenue. So Parker saw this whole change from World War I up into the early 1920s, what was happening on Broadway. And at the time, Broadway had 77 Broadway theaters. Now there's about 32 or 33, so it was a huge difference in live theater at the time. So Parker was seeing all those changes. Yes?
I came across a book of Dorothy Parker's book reviews. I think it was called Constant Reader or something
Yes.
like that. Is that still in print?
No, it's not. That book came out shortly after her death. She did book reviews for the New Yorker and then later for Esquire in the 1950s and early 1960s. And that's a collection of her New Yorker book reviews.
Any chance the Society could republish it or something?
What I would rather do is publish all of them and not just a selected few.
Yeah.
The hard thing about a book review, it's different from a theater review. Book reviews, you really need to know the book. And you know the references that are being made into the book. So what I found fascinating about the drama reviews, first of all, you're never going to see any of these shows. You might see a Hamlet revival, but you won't see a John Barrymore. But all these reviews of these shows, these actors who have been dead for many, many years, but it's just really a fascinating read to see her as a young woman. And she was 24 when she started working at Vanity Fair. So she was a Broadway critic at 24 and the only female in the theater writing about drama and comedy reviews. So that is, I think, fantastic. But the book reviews are fun. Some of there's website, but it's hard to find.
We used to have a copy here, and we have all of her other stuff that's been republished, but that particular volume is unfortunately long gone. I was wondering if there was a way to replace it, but evidently not.
eBay.
Yeah, Alienverse maybe.
Any questions? Yes.
Okay, so the NAACP is where Dorothy Parker's ashes are interred in the Memorial Garden, and they were supposed to move, correct?
Yes, Beth's question is about when Dorothy Parker died, and this is in something in the first book I did about Dorothy Parker, New York. She was cremated in Hartsdale, New York, and she never left instructions for what to do with her remains, and so they weren't claimed. So they were sent from the funeral home to our attorney's office, where they sat for 18 years. And it wasn't until 1988 that they were actually put into the ground. And what happened is they were taken from New York and brought to Baltimore, where the NAACP has their headquarters. And they built this very nice memorial garden in front of their office, and that's where the urn is interred. When President Obama came into office the first time, there was talk that NAACP was going to move from Baltimore to D.C. to be closer to the seat of power. The NAACP is actually a former Catholic convent. They've been there for about 30 or 40 years. They haven't made any intimations they might move again, but if they do move, we've spoken to them about, hey, let's bring her back to New York and have her buried with her parents in Woodlawn Cemetery. So we're in a wait-and-see mode on that one. But that'd be a really fun event.
Okay.
And I wish I knew someone that is in the tombstone business, too, that could help me out. Any questions?
The collected theater review sounds like a great project for the Parker Scholar, but would it be commercially viable?
I think it's going to have a very interesting reception. First of all, it's going to appeal to people that are Broadway fans, theater fans. I mean, you're reading about a person who is watching the Barrymores in action, seeing the Ziegfeld Follies 6 years in a row, and in that cast were the greats. You had W.C. Fields, you had Fanny Brice, Mae West, Will Rogers, and these are contemporary accounts of what those people were doing, who then went on to great things in films. But also some really amazing history, too. She was there when the actors' strike of 1919, which led to the formation of Actors' Equity. She was there when the first Jewish actor, got into a mainstream cast. So all of these landmark theater things are in there, too. It's a gold mine for genealogists, family history researchers. There's more than 1,500 names are in the book. Over 1,000 shows are in the book. So I think it might have an interest in people that are interested in New York theater history and also, celebrity culture at the time. Well, that's what I'll tell the editor. Any other questions?
I may be wrong, but I think her maiden name was Rothschild.
Rothschild, yes.
Was she related to the Anglo-French bankers?
No.
And was she related to the Rothschilds who lived just behind St. Michael's Church around the corner from where she was born?
It's a good question about the Rothschilds. She said in an interview, we didn't know those Rothschilds. And actually there's a Rothschild genealogy database, and the family there's a Rothschild website where you can go on and find anything you want to know about the banking family. Her family line came from Prussia, which is today the Ukraine, and so her dad was a very early immigrant. Her dad was born here, and his parents are the ones that came over. So their roots started in the United States in the before the Civil War, before the 1840s was when those Rothschilds came over. So there's no connection. If there's a family history tied to the Rothschilds that they're still in Long Branch today.
No, well, okay, this is what I know. Ellie Huntley, who I guess recently passed, did she pass yet, or she's in her around 100 or something?
Yeah.
Jim Thompson knows her. All right, she lives up in Manhattan, and she used to own what we always called the Rothschilds. So I don't know her is she a Roth? I don't know.
It was her parents owned the house.
Okay. I know that she knew Dorothy Parker because Jim Thompson had told me that. So whether they're related, but they were right around the corner from each other, kind of their properties would almost go back to back.
Right.
It's the house, where St. Michael's Church is? It's the pretty house on the lake that's right behind St. Michael's Church.
Very, very blue.
Yeah, now it's blue. It wasn't.
The Rothschilds, to fill in the gaps for those that aren't aware of the research that Beth and Joe and the group have done, they used the sewer records to track down where the cottage was, which is the present-day Fountain Apartments, and that's where the plaque is. What happened after Dorothy Parker's mother died in 1899 is her father, Henry, gave the house to his younger brother, Martin. Martin was a really successful garment manufacturer like his older brother. Martin married a woman from upstate New York who was 10 years older than him and Catholic. The Rothschilds, the one thing they shared was assimilation. They never self-identified as being Jews. Dorothy Parker's father married two Protestant women, and the younger brother, Martin, also married a Catholic. Martin Rothschild and his wife were passengers on the Titanic, first-class passengers. He died. His body was never found. His wife and their dog survived. that was very devastating to Dorothy Parker's father. When that happened in 1912, it really destroyed Dorothy Parker's dad, who passed away the following year. What the widow did is she went to, I think it's up near, it's in the Finger Lakes. There's a huge mausoleum dedicated to him and a plaque to him. That's where she's interred, up there. I think that's the end of the Rothschilds family right there.
That's it.
There was, Dorothy Parker was the youngest of four, and those kids, she had a couple of nieces and nephews and things like that. And those people are still around. They live in upstate New York. But the Rothschilds family, I don't think, was around much more than the turn of the century, because after the mom died in 1899, the dad gave the house to his younger brother, who then died 12 years later, and I think that's when the property probably passed on to another owner. You're talking about real estate records from 100 years ago, and I don't know if there's any other Rothschilds who would still be around. It's interesting on that map, who their neighbors were. Guggenheim, Seligman, all these,
Yeah.
prominent Jewish families from New York. They all had cottages, in a row, right there on Ocean Avenue. Other questions? Who has a favorite cocktail they want to try on me? None? Okay, we'll do that at the mix. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. All right, I invite everybody to visit Kevin at his table and look at the book.